Hey everybody. So I'm starting a series today called 10 Lessons I Learned by Opposing Donald Trump or something like that. And today I'm going to share the first of those lessons. But first, I want to give you a sense of where the whole series is going. So first of all, I hope that if you voted for Donald Trump, that you still feel welcome to listen to this series. I'm going to say a bunch of things that you'll probably disagree with, but hopefully in the end, these things are going to help us all get to a better place. And because here's the thing, our country is sick. And I think that everyone listening to this can agree at least with that statement. We might disagree on what exactly we're sick with, but I mean, the evidence of our sickness is everywhere. I mean, I could point to like divisions that we experience, broken relationships. I think there's an undeniable increase in hatred and anger directed towards people we disagree with. I think I see all that going on in the country. And if you voted for Donald Trump, you might say that Democrats or the Marxists or whatever are responsible for all those divisions. And that's fine. That's not my point right now. That's not what I'm talking about today. Later in the series, we're going to get to some of the hot button issues that people have told me really for years have led them to support Donald Trump. And so we'll get to those, and I get it. I mean, I was a lifelong Republican, and I was a pro-life activist before I went into ministry years ago. And I'm not ignorant about the issues that people care about. I just had to rethink everything starting in 2016 when the Republicans tried to give me Donald Trump. And it opened my eyes to some real brokenness within the GOP. And since that's the party that I came from, that's the party that I tend to focus on. So, and then when the Republican senators, and when people who I'd voted for failed to hold him accountable, it just pushed me out of the party permanently. So I'll be an independent for the rest of my life. And that's where I'm coming from on this. But anyway, the election is over. So I'm hoping that now we can talk about some of those hot button issues with a little bit less fear and a little bit less anger for at least a couple years. And maybe by the time the next election cycle rolls around, we won't all feel quite so trapped by the way that party politics has been playing out. So I just want to talk about these things. Now, as someone who's opposed Donald Trump for 8 years, I obviously think that his election last month, after everything we know about him, his election is evidence of a deep disease or dis-ease in our body. And so I want to make that point first. I think there are a couple of undeniable facts, and right now, I'm not going to say these things to be controversial or to tick anyone off. I'm just saying them so we can build a conversation based on something that we agree on. So if you voted for Donald Trump, just hang with me for a second. It might sound kind of judgmental what I'm going to say here, but that's not the point right now with this talk. So here we go. I'll just say it. I think that every person who voted for Donald Trump this year just factually voted for a convicted criminal. And that is a fact. He's not an alleged criminal. He's a convicted criminal. And every person who voted for Trump this year voted for a man who was proven in a court of law to have sexually abused a woman. And again, that's just a fact. So he's also an alleged abuser of a lot of other women, but it's simply a fact to state that he was found by a jury to have committed sexual abuse in a civil court. So without going into other things like the tens of thousands of lies that he's been proven to have told, or the abusive language that we all watch him use against his opponents every day, I just want to stick with those two things that have been proven in a court of law. And here's my point in saying it. I have a point for saying it. By any standard of measurement, a democracy that elects a convicted criminal and a proven sexual abuser to the highest office in the land is a sick country. There's something wrong there. Now, if you supported Trump, you might say that the sickness is in the legal system. Or you might say that he was unfairly prosecuted, or that our jury system is broken, or that the alternative to Trump was even worse than a convicted criminal and a proven sexual abuser. And okay, but can we all agree that the only way that someone like that gets elected is if a huge number of citizens believe that our country is sick enough that electing a guy like that somehow made sense? So I just think we all agree that the country is sick in some ways. So if we believe that, don't we owe it to our country to try to get to the root of the illness? And I don't know how we get to the root of the illness if we can't talk to each other. So over this 10-part series, I'm going to lay out 10 lessons that I've learned over the 8 years that I've been opposing Donald Trump. And I'm not laying out like what the Democrats have to do to win in 2028. I'm not an expert on politics, on stuff like that. And what you'll see today is that I'm currently voting for Democratic candidates because the Republican Party has become antithetical to my deepest values. And so even if I agree with some Republican policy positions, I'm repulsed by who the party has become under Donald Trump. And I predict, I hope I'm wrong, but I predict that it's going to get worse before it gets better. But if the Democrats decided that the only way to beat the MAGA movement is to become the MAGA movement, with all the hatred and the lies and the abuse and the corruption that defines the MAGA movement, then I won't be supporting them either. And so that brings me to the first lesson that I want to talk about today, the first lesson I've learned in 8 years of opposition to Donald Trump. Here it is. If we sacrifice our deepest values in order to win some temporary policies, we lose everything in the end. We'll only end up empowering craven and wicked rulers who'll gladly give us a few policies in exchange for our souls. And that's what's happened to the party that I used to belong to. The party that used to call itself the party of family values and patriotism has been absolutely corrupted by 8 years of just caving in to Donald Trump at every step. So people might say, well, I voted for his policies, but those policies are worthless if values like truth and justice don't matter anymore. In the absence of truth, only power remains. And when power is the only thing that matters, then those policies that the leader promised in order to get power are no longer necessary. So what do I mean by these values? Now, I've mentioned that I was involved in the pro-life movement for many years back before I went into pastoral ministry. So obviously, respect for human life has always been one of my stated values. But what happened during the Trump years is that I learned that there are a lot more ways to devalue human life than simply our laws around abortion. So I'm going to do an entire talk on abortion as part of this series. So I'm just mentioning it here as an example of a value that I've had to wrestle with in light of other values that are being corrupted. So during 8 years of Trump, I've been forced to go deeper into understanding my core values versus just voting for pro-life policies. And that's because my deeper values have been under assault by Donald Trump and his enablers. So I'm just going to share a few examples of the values that I've come to treasure during this time. So I found that my political values can be broken down into 3 main categories. I'm pro-democracy, first of all. I think Americans have gotten really lazy about our democracy. We kind of take it for granted. And for all the people listening who are saying, well, we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic or something else like that, I think you know what I mean. We obviously are a certain kind of democracy, and the things that I find beautiful about that democracy are being dragged through the mud right now by Trump and the MAGA movement. I think that people in the MAGA movement feel threatened by the things about American democracy that I love, because they fear losing their place of preeminence. So that value that I have of democracy is under threat by the MAGA movement. And without a functioning democracy, none of the policies that any of us care about are really going to mean anything. They're all subject just to the whims of people who are relentless enough to seize the power and hold on to it. So democracy is the first value that I realized I care about far more deeply than I ever knew before. But a second value is this. I want to put it in a positive term, but the best word I can come up with is anti-corruption. Anti-corruption, and I think that's under threat right now. I think that everywhere that democracies have come under attack in the world, we see just high levels of corruption. And I know there's always some level of corruption in any democracy, but once we elect leaders who've proven that they don't think the rules apply to them, then they feel free to break those rules at will. And so we need these checks and balances. And I don't know how we can make it more clear that we're going to tolerate corruption in our leaders than when we elect a guy who's a convicted criminal. I mean, it's no wonder that our elected leaders, our elected Republican leaders, are reluctant to hold him accountable when they see their own voters re-elect him when he's a convicted criminal. That tells them what we care about, what the American people care about. So here's where that leads. Corruption isn't just an ugly thing. It's not just an unfair thing that we're rewarding corrupt people by electing them to high offices. Corruption doesn't work. I mean, we can look at Russia. It's got, I think, the largest land mass of any country in the world. You can check it on that. I didn't look that up, but I think it's true. And it's got unbelievable natural resources. Yet its people live in relative poverty compared to the average person living in a functioning Western democracy. And why is that? Because it's a corrupt system from top to bottom. I've noticed, back when I was a conservative Republican, conservatives always like to talk about a merit-based system. Okay, so then why vote for Donald Trump? I mean, he's proven throughout his life that just like Vladimir Putin, the most important trait that he looks for in a subordinate is loyalty to himself. Where's the merit in nominating Matt Gaetz to head the Justice Department? Where's the merit in nominating Pete Hegseth to lead the Defense Department, for crying out loud? Where's the merit in nominating Tulsi Gabbard to be in charge of all of our most sensitive national secrets? I mean, these are absurd appointments, and we all know that I could list many, many more. And we can see where this goes in the end. Conservatives always talked for years about the amazing strength of the manly Russian army compared to the woke United States army. But when the Russians invaded Ukraine, the whole world got to witness their humiliation. The whole world saw how corruption had hollowed out that army. They weren't elevating the best and the brightest. They were elevating all through their leadership structure the people who would pose the least threat to their own power. And what Trump is trying to do right now with his cabinet picks is a similar type of authoritarian corruption. He's done this for years. He's put cronies and family members in charge of things that they're not qualified for. But he's taken it to a ridiculous, extreme level with some of these candidates. The corruption part, I think, is obvious when we look at just who some of these people are. But the authoritarian part is the interesting one. The authoritarian part will only work if Republican senators choose to play along with that. This is where we're going to find out if they're going to go along with his authoritarianism, because they have the checks and balances. They have the power not to approve these appointments. But when Trump threatened to bypass basic things like FBI background checks for his nominees, if Republicans choose to go along with that wish, then that is authoritarian corruption. Or if they go along with someone like Kash Patel as FBI chief, knowing his lack of qualifications and his stated desire to go after the enemies of Donald Trump, that's authoritarian corruption. Trump is obviously as corrupt as the day is long, but he's only an authoritarian if the Republicans in the Senate allow him to be. So the first two political values that I've gone deeper into in the past several years then are pro-democracy and anti-corruption. And then the last one, the third one, is that I've learned that I'm absolutely anti-Taliban. And by the Taliban, I mean the Christian Taliban in America. Christian nationalist beliefs are not Christian in any way that I recognize. The Christian nationalist worldview poses a danger to America, and it poses a danger to actual Christians. So I'm not going to go deep into that today because that's a huge part of what this channel is about. But on this channel, I intend to continue to use my voice to speak up for these values, to speak up for democracy, to call on Republicans to stand against Trump's authoritarian corruption, and to speak against the heresy of Christian nationalism. Those are the political things that I most care about, because I think if we don't get those things right, then none of the other policies that we say we care about have any chance of long-term success. So I've said a lot already. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to list some of the personal values that I've seen just come under threat from the MAGA movement. And I've written about all of these things in both of my books. So I'll just say these, right now. I'm just fighting for values like these on this channel: truth, compassion, peace, justice, and hope, just to name a few. So I'll just repeat the lesson one more time. If we sacrifice our deepest values in order to win some temporary policies, then we lose everything in the end. That's where my former Republican Party has found itself under Donald Trump. And that's why I'm not a Republican any longer. I don't care about the policies that anyone might toss at me, because they're meaningless if the entire system is rotten. So I don't mean this to be a downer. I actually mean it to help us focus our minds on what we can do to fix these things. And so I'll be talking about that in several of the upcoming videos. So until then, thanks for listening.